Roee, please take your place. We will proceed now with Dr. Roee Goldschmidt, who will speak about trends in the development and study of Kabbalah in Galicia. Where are you?
Here I am.
We'll talk from here.
Yeah.
Okay. So Roee is a lecturer at the Open University, what we call Università Ptucha. His research supported by this fund focused on social and intellectual aspects of Jewish history in the modern era, especially regarding Kabbalah and Hasidism. Recently was published a book in Magnus Press, I got it, דורשי רשומות, right? In English it's called Homiletic Literature in Eastern Europe, Rhetoric, Talmudic Erudition and Social Stature, Magnus Press 2022, now we will hear you more.
Thank you very much. Before beginning, I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to speak at this important forum and the Jewish Galicia Bukovina organization for its continued support of my research. In 19th century Galicia, Kabbalistic teaching were far more than a framework of esoteric ideas. Indeed, Kabbalah constituted a significant factor in the social battle between Maskilim and Hasidim, between Enlightenment and Orthodoxy. The Maskilim depicted the Kabbalah as idol worship or heresy. By contrast, the Hasidim did not view the Maskilim as real Jews, referring them as Erev Rav, and considering them representative of all that impure in the world. Consequently, Kabbalistic works assumed a place at the center of the social discourse. Jewish society is divided more or less into those who identify with Kabbalistic ideas and those who oppose them. This battle between Maskilim and Hasidim led to great distortion in how modern scholars came to view Hasidism, and thus academic scholarship ignored the unique view of the unique characteristics of the Kabbalah that developed in Eastern Europe. Although a romantic view of Hasidim developed among some Maskilim and scholars, mainly at the beginning of the 20th century, academic research has continued to neglect the Kabbalah in this area. Gershom Scholem, the greatest scholar of Kabbalah, discussed very specific topics in the study of Eastern European Kabbalah. He focused extensively on the Sabbateans, considering Hasidism as a reactionary response and a continuation of Sabbatinism. In Scholem writings, we find few reference to other topics and figures. He explains that the Polish Kabbalists did not develop a systematic Kabbalah, and their Kabbalistic literary activity was confused and difficult to study and understand, similarly to their Talmudic innovations. Today, I will demonstrate that Scholem was partly correct. Indeed, the methods characteristic of the Eastern European study house and the casuistries, a pilpul, typical of Talmudic study there, deeply influenced the Kabbalistic works composed in this area. However, in many cases, they exhibit a very clear, deep, and critical methodology. In addition, I will also trace the esoteric traditions that largely disappeared from Kabbalistic discourse during the 17th century, but were preserved in Eastern European Kabbalistic works, which continued to discuss and employ them until the beginning of the 20th century. The limitation of time will not enable us to go to great detail, therefore I will endeavor to present brief examples highlighting major trends. As early as the 16th century, both members of the elite and the simple Jews in Krakow studied Kabbalah extensively. Torat HaOlah by Rabbi Moshe Isserlish the rabbi of Krakow, one of the most important figures in the halachic tradition, like we heard from Tamara, contains his book Torat HaOlah contains a comprehensive chapter devoted to Kabbalah. This chapter opens with an apology for discussing Kabbalah matters and explaining them publicly, while at the same time Isserlich complains that the study of Kabbalah had become widespread among those not worthy of it. I quote, and many of the masses of the people, each one hurries to study a matter of Kabbalah because it is delight to the eyes. The reason for this, according to Isserlich, was the extensive printing and distribution of Kabbalistic works, which led to a situation in which simple householders, Baalei Batim, incapable of learning the weekly portion with Rashi, sat and studied Kabbalah in groups. Indeed, in this period, many works of Kabbalah were printed in Italy and afterwards in the well-known printing house of Rabbi Yitzchak Prostitz in Krakow. Accordingly, students had greater access to a variety of Kabbalistic works. Based on Isserlich's long and detailed discussions, we can conclude that he possessed a wide range of Kabbalistic sources, yet he evidently only had access to printed works. Likewise, apparently Isserlich himself did not make significant Kabbalistic innovations, and his words suggest that he did not inherit a real Kabbalistic traditions. Indeed, his discussions adapt the approach prevalent in writings composed by members of the preceding generation, seeking to compromise between Kabbalistic and philosophical sources, mainly Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. Such an approach is also characteristic of writing composed by other members of Isserlich's generation and the preceding one. Thus, for example, he mentioned in support of his argument the Kabbalist Rabbi Asher, who lived in Krakow one generation before Isserlich and was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yaakov Polak, known as the founding father of the Polish yeshivot. This same Rabbi Asher also composed a Kabbalistic work named Emek HaBracha, which was never printed and has not survived, but is mentioned in several places. Another well-known Kabbalist of this generation, who was raised in the same area, was Rabbi Matityahu Delacroix. He was born and raised in Poland, and late in life served as a rabbi of the city of Shevershin. In 1550, Delacroix left for Italy to study at the University of Bologna. He too tried to combine philosophy, science, and Kabbalah. Despite Isserlich's statement that in his lifetime the study of Kabbalah had become widespread and many engaged in it, based on the literature that has reached us, it is difficult to discern a unique style of Kabbalistic text composed by members of that generation. Indeed, in this period, oral and written traditions arrived from the Byzantine area, Italy, and North Africa, and the developing world of Torah that blossomed in Poland began to absorb them. We find indication that the study of Kabbalah increased in the generation following Isserlich. In the writings of his students and his students' we see how the study methods and the way of thought characteristic of the Polish Talmudic study house also permeated the study of Kabbalah. Indeed, we can talk about three unique aspects of method of Talmudic casuistry, characteristic of this geo-cultural area that influenced the study of Kabbalah. The first aspect is deep involvement with textual criticism, comparison of parallel sources and of manuscripts with print editions. The second aspect is the construction of multiple stage processes that collate wide range of sources from various fields, which, when combined, show them in a new light, a kind of new creation. This system is accepted in Eastern European Talmudic casuistry. It constituted an important element of the study house experience, and it also characterized and modeled oral preaching in synagogues as well as homiletical literature. This system seeks to present the sources in an aesthetic manner and to impress the readers or listeners with the sophisticated process. The third aspect is encouraging students to compose. Encouraging students to compose their own independent innovations and to develop independent thought process. Exceptional students would present casuistries to the entire yeshiva at certain point throughout the year. Furthermore, students were permitted to disagree with the teachers. These three aspects significantly influenced Kabbalistic works originating from Eastern Europe. And we will touch briefly on 2 or 3 examples of each aspect. The aspect of textual criticism is ostensibly the most difficult, because in general we do not possess many works of textual criticism that compare and check different versions of text. This is important yet exhausting work, and not many scholars over the generations engage in it. Yet in Eastern Europe, a number of scholars did so in various fields of Kabbalah. As early as the beginning of the 17th century, a book by Rabbi Aaron Zelig ben Moshe of Zhorkiev was published concerning textual criticism of Sefer HaZohar. And it notes the great differences between the Cremona and Mantua editions. According to Professor Daniel Abrams, Rabbi Aaron's work was the first and only text in this topic to methodologically present detailed comment that include textual criticism. Another example of editing and textual criticism is the activity of Rabbi Meir Poppels, who arranged the teachings of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ha'ari from Tzfat, while determining a hierarchy of stages in Luria's teaching. Another later example is the book Saraf Pri Etz Chaim by Rabbi Moshe of Dolina, the student of Baal Shem Tov, which offers textual and content analysis of Lurianic kavanot, Lurianic intentions, based on an extensive range of print sources and manuscript. The second aspect that I mentioned are casuistries, which build upon a wide range of sources, questions, and answers, seeking to present the sources in a complex and impressive manner. We can classify such works as Kabbalistic homiletical literature, and in this context, we should mention 2 figures who played prominent and influential role: Rabbi Natan Neta Shapira, the author of Megalei Amukot, and Rabbi Yeshaya Levi Horowitz, the author of Shnei Luchot HaBrit, Hashla. Both were members of the generation after Yisraelish, and they laid down several important foundations that continue to influence every Kabbalistic and homiletical work produced in this area until the 20th century, establishing a style of writing and developing ideas. Now, before moving to the third aspect that I mentioned concerning the independent thought of Eastern European Kabbalists, I want to mention another matter: the esoteric traditions and Kabbalistic literature studied in Eastern Europe. I mentioned at the beginning of my lecture Rabbi Moshe Isserlich and their relatively limited range of Kabbalistic literature at his disposal. And yet, in the next generation, a wide range of Kabbalistic works were printed in Krakow and Lublin, mainly, many of them composed in the diaspora created by the Spanish exile, mainly in North Africa. One of the most prominent and highly quoted books in this category is Sefer HaTmuna. This book was apparently printed in Krakow in 1599. In addition to the printed version, from the beginning of the 17th century, the most important center of copying manuscripts of this work moved from Italy and Byzantine area to Eastern Europe. Indeed, most of the manuscript copies of the work created and sold in this period were purchased by Eastern European Kabbalists. The ideas that we find in Sefer HaTmuna do not accord with the Zohar stream in terms of their historical perception, the messianic idea, the process of redemption, explanation regarding the existence of evil, the role of the nation of the world, and other points. These ideas trickled deep into the literature and thinking of Eastern European Kabbalists. Rabbi Yishaya Levi Horowitz and Natan Netta Shapira of Krakow frequently cite Sefer HaTmuna on a wide range of topics and matters. With the blossoming of the Kabbalistic center in Tzfat in the 16th century, the status of Sefer HaTmuna declined significantly. The Kabbalists of Tzfat, such as Rabbi Moshe Cordovero and Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, sharply criticized the book and its historical perspective. Such harsh criticism by two rabbis who became the greatest authorities and most influential figures in the field of Kabbalah was highly effective. And Sefer HaTmuna pretty much disappeared from the landscape of Kabbalistic literature in Italy and other places. Yet in Eastern Europe, even Kabbalists who followed the teaching of Luria and Cordovero did not necessarily accept their criticism of Sefer HaTmuna, even sharply disagreeing with it. And here I reach to the third aspect I mentioned earlier, the development of independent thinking. In this respect, I want to focus on Rabbi Meir Poppers, whom I also mentioned earlier, and this is certainly one example of many, but it seems particularly prominent. As I said before, Poppers played a major role in disseminating the Lurianic Kabbalah. Poppers, who traveled to the land of Israel, studied Kabbalah there before returning to his home city of Krakow in 1649. In Krakow, he edited and distributed the Lurianic writings, in addition to printing his own Kabbalistic innovations. In his super commentary, Or Tzion, on Nachmanides' work, he had to make a determination in favor of either the Lurianic Kabbalah, to which he had devoted long and significant years of his life, or the traditions of Sefer HaTmuna that he studied in his youth. When faced with this dilemma, he clung to the tradition that he received in his youth and opposed Luria's approach, a phenomenon not found among Kabbalists in other locations. Many of his contemporaries, as well as scholars following in the following generations up to the end of the 19th century, also behaved so and expressed a similar sentiment concerning the disagreement between the Kabbalists of Tzfat and the circle of Sefer HaTmuna. Apart from the central social context of Kabbalah in 19th century Galicia, with which I opened my lecture, it is necessary to understand that the increasing Kabbalistic engagement during the 19th century was not only connected to political topics. In this period, many Kabbalists, and when I say Kabbalist, I refer also to Hasidim. Many Kabbalistic works were already highly sorry. Okay. In this period, many Kabbalistic works were already highly accessible in print, and the Kabbalistic literary activity further intensified. Kabbalists in Galicia combined various traditions to develop ideas, systems, or simply a spontaneous response to the various events that modernity brought with it. The characteristics of the Eastern European Talmudic study house that I described above played a role in the development of the ideas that Kabbalists employed to explain new scientific knowledge or suited to the trends of developing Western mysticism. The cultural area in which the Galician Kabbalah developed produced a range of unique Kabbalistic works that were influenced by the study methods and Talmudic creativity characteristic of the Eastern European study house. I have surveyed the trends in the development of Galician Kabbalah, a phenomenon that had not received significant scholarly attention. I hope that scholars will respond to this lacuna and we will see increasing academic engagement with this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If there are any questions or notes, please, Michael.
I had hoped that you would talk more about Galicia rather than the earlier period. I just want to ask you, Tzvi Elimelech Dinov writes about the neglect of Kabbalah in his time, and he blames it on unnamed great rabbis who have brought this about. To my mind, it's clearly Yechezkel Landau. To what extent in Galicia did you really have interest in Kabbalah? With the exception of Komarno. There you have a very clear sort of interest and an emphasis that is really unusual. But as far as I can tell, the rest seems to have, I don't know if you can call it Kabbalah, you know, that sort of Hasidic teachings with sprinkling of things like that. But I don't know where you have any sort of systematic or any type of detailed Kabbalistic sort of teachings.
Well, systematic Kabbalistic works, we can count Rabbi Moshe of Dolena, the student of Baal Shem Tov. It's the most impressive, I think it's the most impressive work dealing with Lurianic intentions, with Lurianic kavanot. And also, if we go earlier, it's not originally from Galicia, but it's hard to put borders of Galicia and non-Galicia, because when Galicia was invented, well, Jews never, they didn't aware to this, when they weren't aware to that, but their cultural characteristics changed during these 100 years, and maybe in the end of the 19th century you can discern unique characteristic of Galicia area in many fields of Jewish religious creativity. But about concerning your question about the if we can talk about systematic works, we can talk also on Rabbi Yaakov Koppel Sha'arei Gan Eden of Mezerich. Shaya Tishby said that he was Sabbatin, but it doesn't matter whether he was or wasn't Sabbatin. He was a very. I think it's the most impressive description of the Kabbalistic creation of the world, the way that the world, and he also rejects Luria. He follows Luria, but also in the terms of historical, this specific historical conception of Sefer HaTmuna. He says, well, Luria didn't knew Sefer HaTmuna, but I want to give you the real picture of the process, the Kabbalistic process of the creation.
But the question is really 19th century. In 19th century, in Western Central Europe, Kabbalah disappears.
I really don't agree with you about that, because there is a very massive activity of Kabbalistic works. And when you mentioned Rab Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, I think his work on the rationale of the commandments, Derech Pikudecha, which is a very impressive combination of Kabbalistic thought and halachic
No, what I said is in Western Europe it disappears.
In Western Europe. Yeah, of course.
So now the question is, what happens in Eastern Europe? And in Eastern Europe, there's very clearly that Yechezkel Landau, the whole Prague school, goes against Kabbalah per se.
Yeah, but the brother-in-law of Baal Shem Tov and his friends from the Brody study house.
But 19th century, what happens?
I think as I said, in the 19th century, I think Kabbalistic activity is increased. I think that we have many works of creative Kabbalistic works. As I said about the way they react when they aware to a new scientific ideas, when they configure that the world exists more than 66,000 years, and they say, okay, but in Sefer HaTmuna we have much more than one word. We have seven stages that history should, and now we are in other stage, but the world exists more than 6,000 years. So
okay, we have to
cut.
close the discussion because time is running. So thank you very much, Roee. Thank you.